The story has just gotten more intriguing thanks to amateur genealogist Jacqueline Johnson. She's fascinated by her great-great-grandfather, Albert Perry, who appears on the 1870 census as a freed slave in South Carolina.
He's 43 listed on here, so that means he was born about 1827. And there's my great-grandfather, Clyde, at the age of 3, a toddler. This is the first major census that slaves were included on, with the last names. Prior to that, it was mostly recognized as somebody's property.
Johnson has been able to trace her roots back 5 generations, but she can't find any records before 1870.
This is our family tree. This is myself, my mother, my grandmother, and this is my great-great-grandfather, Albert Perry. It's frustrating that you can't go back any further than him because, people just didn't pop up and start existing in 1870. They were alive before then, so where were they? They were somewhere. I want to give a voice to this story. I want to find out, who is Albert Perry?
I've enlisted the help of 3 scientists who use genetic ancestry tracing in their research.
In 2006, I was watching a PBS special called African-American Lives, and they were presenting DNA.
We submitted second DNA samples. These samples can then be compared to DNA samples taken from around the world.
They were showing people, okay, you were connected to this group of people in Liberia and this group of people in Nigeria. And I was like, oh, that's the way I can do it. I can actually test my own DNA and find out where we connect in Africa.
To track Albert Perry's lineage, she persuaded a male cousin to provide a sample of his Y chromosome. It was tested here at Family Tree DNA. Bennett Greenspan runs the company.
When I came into work the morning that the sample had been scored the night before, the technicians were actually very excited because they said, we've seen something and we've never seen anything like this before. Typically, you might find 1 or 2 or 3 novel mutations, but in this sample, we found between 40 and 50 novel mutations, which means it defines an entirely new subsection of the tree of mankind.
The Y chromosome from Jacqueline Johnson's cousin was so unusual, it was given its own name, A00. Geneticists checked thousands of other samples in their data sets, but found no one else with the same signal. Until they looked in Western Africa. The trail leads 7,000 miles from Houston to Mbeta village in Western Cameroon. In 2001, there was a program to sample DNA here. When the samples were reviewed in 2012, 11 of the men were a match for A00. No one knows who they are because the tests were anonymous. But they're the only other people in the world known to have the same Y chromosome as Jacqueline Johnson's great-great-grandfather, Albert Perry. He must have lived in Mbeta before being transported as a slave to the United States, carrying with him the A00 Y chromosome. What's so remarkable about this chromosome is its age. By counting the number of mutations, it's been dated at 338,000 years old, which means it entered the modern human gene pool before modern humans were even thought to exist.
This sample was kind of history-shattering. It was older than anything that science had ever seen in a male-inherited Y chromosome. And that's what made this discovery so interesting, because this made mankind actually much older than what the scientists had been theorizing for years.
Until recently, the timeline of our species seemed clear. Every man on Earth could trace his ancestry back to genetic Adam. Every woman back to genetic Eve. The earliest fossil evidence goes back 195,000 years to Homo 1. 300,000 years ago lived a forerunner of our species in Jebel Irhoud. But this Y chromosome was older than all of them. A piece of modern human DNA that was 338,000 years old. Potentially a new start date for our species.
When the results came, I was excited. Now his name is in the book. Can you imagine, from a slave, unknown, kind of like somebody's property, and all of a sudden it's known around the world.
To understand more about the A00Y chromosome, geneticists need more samples. Matthew Fomina Forca is the local researcher who did the initial sampling in Mbeta village.
I've come here because this is the Nkombo community where I collected DNA samples 12 years ago. The samples were analyzed and realized that this population has the 11 samples who belong to the A0, implying that those A00 which were found here have contributed to the beginning of humanity. Today, we are continuing the DNA collection that has started in 2001. I am going to swab your mouth with a sterile cotton.
Unfortunately, the climate of Cameroon is too wet to preserve ancient human fossils. So DNA is the only way to find out if our species really did emerge here. But there is another possibility, another reason for the age of the A00Y chromosome. Perhaps we inherited it from a different species of human. Although we are now the only humans on the planet, it was not always this way. For tens of thousands of years, the forests of Africa would have been shared between modern humans and archaic humans. It's been assumed there was little, if any, contact between them. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if DNA passed from one species of human to another?
There may have been archaic forms of humans that lived in Western Africa that happened upon modern populations, and this Y chromosome was introduced into the modern population through interbreeding.
Although modern humans were a distinct species, they seem to have mated with other, older species of human and picked up parts of their DNA.
That would help to explain why we found a 338,000-year-old Y chromosome in a very small pocket of humanity in Western Cameroon. For the last 100 years or so, it's been very convenient to think that humans originated in a very simple way in a Garden of Eden. But now we know from the DNA itself that matings between different forms, archaic forms, modern forms, has been going on. Who knows how long that's going back in time, which in fact makes us a lot more like the rest of nature.
Something similar has shown up in southern Cameroon. These rainforests are home to the pygmies. They are some of the last traditional hunter-gatherers on Earth, living in much the same way as they have for 100,000 years, finding food wherever they can. Genetically, the pygmies are as close as anyone to Africa's first modern humans. And their DNA is very revealing. Rather than looking only at the Y chromosome or mitochondria, geneticists can now analyze 6 billion fragments across the entire pygmy genome. And they're finding regions that are so ancient and unusual, they look more archaic than modern. Again, they seem to be the result of interbreeding. But how can this be? According to the human family tree, archaic humans are species to us modern humans. And different species are meant to be incapable of interbreeding. But in reality, it all depends how closely related they are, when they last shared a common ancestor.